Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, talking through what has happened over the first three games. What are the biggest things that Dallas is doing or that the Wolves aren't doing that have led to an 0-3 deficit in the Western Conference Finals? We'll also talk about changes that have to happen in Game 4 if the Wolves are going to extend their season. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Happy Tuesday, everybody, and I guess happy Game 4 tonight. Timberwolves have the opportunity to extend their season to Game 5 back in Minnesota on Thursday night with a win this evening. A lot to get to today. We're going to talk about the first three games in their totality, the biggest issues that the Wolves have had so far with Dallas, and specifically with Luka and Kyrie, and then really the offensive issues, which have been greater. And Luka's gotten a lot of attention, and rightfully so, for how incredible he's been. But it's Minnesota's offense that has really just not showed up. So a lot to get to here today. Big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. Quick reminder, tonight's game also will have the live postcast. I'm not 100% sure who will be on the postcast tonight, but it's over on Locked On Sports Minnesota. Luke Inman will be hosting with a guest talking Wolves Mavs Game 4. So be sure to check that out. Again, Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube, and then you can find the audio right here on this feed after the fact. So if you can't watch it live, you can pick it up late tonight or early Wednesday, and then I'll be back Wednesday, of course, with the post-game pod as well. So again, Locked On Sports Minnesota immediately following Game 4. For the Locked On Sports Minnesota Locked On Wolves postcast. All right. So let's start here. And I did something similar here on Monday's show. I want to do like a macro look at this series so far and just kind of talk about like what has happened here. What's the series in a nutshell? And what I said on Monday was, and I should have said this more concisely. Oftentimes in the playoffs, the team with the better player wins. That didn't happen last round with Jokic in Denver. You're not always going to end up with the best two players in the league in the finals. That's just not how it always works, right? You're not going to have Jokic and Giannis. You won't this year. Not saying for sure that Giannis is the second best player. You're not going to have Jokic and Embiid. Obviously, injury plays into that. But a lot of times that's what it comes down to in the playoffs. That to me is a key here. Luka's been incredible. And we talked about the experience thing the other day. And again, I picked the Wolves to win the series. This isn't excuse making. This is evaluating why this is a 3-0 series lead for Dallas. I thought Minnesota would win this series in 6. That's not possible anymore. So I'm not making an excuse. I'm just evaluating what's happened here. The experience advantage of Jason Kidd, Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving is clearly matters on some level, at least when it comes to some of the late game execution, the adjustment stuff that we're not seeing from the Minnesota side, and we're not seeing the execution from Ant, from Cat, from others. So that certainly plays into it. The thing that I talked about a bit on Monday, and actually I saw a tweet from Seth Partnow, which said exactly the same thing, but with a few numbers here that I'm going to list, courtesy of Seth, to kind of back up what I said yesterday. Seth Partnow, of course, is the former director of basketball research for the Milwaukee Bucks. He used to write at Nylon Calculus, and he currently writes at The Athletic and among other things. But he tweeted this out. He said, Dallas is up 3-0 in the conference finals with a total margin of plus 13. Because all these games have been close. Remember, it was a 4-point game. One was a 3-point game. Game 2 was a 1-point game. This last game ended up being a 9-point game, but it was closer than that. Then he says, in this series, fourth quarter semi-contested shots. So semi-contested is a defender within 4 to 6 feet of you. So it's not a closely guarded shot, and it's not a wide open shot. And what he says is roughly a third of your shots usually come from this range. In the fourth quarter in the series, Dallas is 7 of 9 on semi-contested shots. And all of their semi-contested shots have come from Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic. Minnesota in the same shot designation, so a defender within 4 to 6 feet, is 3 of 13. And there's 6 different players that have attempts. Think about that. There's only 8 guys in the rotation right now. Minnesota's attempted 4 more semi-contested shots, which is probably too many. They've made 4 less semi-contested shots. Dallas's have all come from their best 2 players. Minnesota's have come from 6 of the 8 guys in their rotation. And then he caps off his tweet by saying, make or miss league, plus the best guy wins the series in a nutshell. I already covered the best player thing. The make or miss league thing gets thrown around a lot, but a lot of times that matters. And I know a lot of Wolves players said this in the postgame and their postgame pressers following the loss in game 3, but it's 100% true. The Wolves offensive process has not been very good, but when they've been able to generate open shots, they're still not making them. Dallas largely is. Now, not everybody on Dallas. Like PJ Washington hit a massive 3 late in that game that I think took it from a 1-point game to a 4-point game in game 3. For the series, he's 4 of 18. He's, 22% from outside the arc. He has come back down to earth, which I was counting on following the first round, or following the way he performed against OKC in the second round. Derek Jones Jr. is only 3 of 8 in this series, so he hasn't been a massive factor. So the role players actually, in a strange twist, this is exactly where I thought the Wolves' depth would help them, and it hasn't. All right, let me say that a different way. The Wolves' depth has been better than Dallas's depth, and by that I mean their role players. But the stars, the imbalance in star performance has been far greater than I think anyone expected. Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid have been hands down the best 2 players on the floor for Minnesota in this series. Kyle Anderson's obviously had moments, but certainly from an offensive standpoint, and really two-way standpoint with Jaden, but Naz and Jaden have been the best 2 players on the floor for Minnesota, hands down. PJ Washington, Derek Jones Jr. have been essentially non-factors. Derek Lively's been great, of course, but at least in terms of offensive impact and outside shooting, Josh Green's he's a 3 of 4 from outside the arc, but he's not a massive part of this rotation, what they're trying to do. The role guys, the starting role guys for Minnesota have far outperformed the starting role guys for Dallas. But Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving have been the best 2 players on the floor in this series, and it is not close. Luka's averaging 33 points on 46, 41, 88 shooting splits. 46% from the field and 41% from 3 from Luka. 33 points a game, plus 9 assists and 8 rebounds, rounding up slightly on those. Kyrie, 28 points a game on 52.5, 44, 74 shooting splits. He's 44% from 3, 7 of 16, and 53% from the field. Also 5 assists and 4 rebounds a game for Kyrie. It's not close who the best players on the floor have been. Flip that around. Anthony Edwards is averaging 22, but he's shooting 39% from the field and 33% from 3. Cat is 3 of 22 outside the arc, 15 and 8 in this series over 3 games for Cat. Under 28% from the field and 13% from outside the arc. I don't think you need me to write off the stats to tell you this, but it makes the difference that much more stark when you really line up the comparison of the best 2 players on either team. Rudy's essentially been a non-factor offensively. I know he shot the ball. He always shoots the ball well, right? He's always getting a bunch of dunks. He's only got the line 14 times over 3 games. You'd like that to be a little bit higher. That's a little, that's 4, a little over 4 free throws a game. That should be a little higher for Rudy. He's been a non-factor. Mike Conley's been good offensively, but he's been put in some tough spots defensively. Jaden and Naz have been great. What I want to do next is I want to kind of put a bow on this kind of bigger picture thing. Then I want to get in the weeds a little bit on some specific adjustments, things to look out for in game 4. And that's how we'll close out the show here today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Check out the line right now for Wolves Mavs on Tuesday night. Mavs are favored by 2. I believe coming into the game, it was a 1.5 point. Dallas was, or no, actually, I think Minnesota was favored by 1.5. Coming into game 4, Dallas is favored by 2, -2. for Dallas, and the money line is minus 130 for Dallas, plus 108 for Minnesota to win this game and force a game 5. Clearly, FanDuel and Vegas expecting the Wolves to kind of be just be ready to be done with this. For the series, in case you're wondering, as we talked about on Monday's show, never in NBA history has a team come back from an 0-3 hole in a playoff series to win a 7-game series. I think it's 0-154. Minnesota's plus 1,400 to win the series right now. Okay, so if you wagered $10, you'd win $140, or if you wagered $100, if I can get it to say $100, if you wager $100, you'd win $1,400 on the Wolves to win the series down in an 0-3 hole. Okay, so go check that out on FanDuel. Also, conference finals MVP. I mean, right now Luka's minus 1,900. Ants plus 1,500. You figure if they're going to come back and win, Ants going to be your guy. Right now, Naz Reid is plus 42,000 for conference finals MVP. For the record, that means if you bet $10, you get $4,200 on Naz Reid to win conference finals MVP. He's been the best player for the Wolves. So if maybe the volume increases and they come back and win the series, he's your guy. I don't know. Go check it out on FanDuel. Again, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? If so, no doubt you have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. Instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Okay, so cliff notes here. Luka is the best player on the floor. He was coming into the series. He absolutely has been in the series. And in this series, the second best player hasn't been Ant, hasn't been Cat, hasn't been Rudy. It's been Kyrie. So Dallas comes in with the best player on the floor. They have the best 2 players on the floor. Massive gap before you get to anybody else. You could argue Derek Lively's been the 3rd best player in this series overall. Before you get to, Naz, Jaden, you could start discussing that. And then the other thing, the make or miss league thing. It's a real thing. The stat that I cited from Seth Partnow on Twitter is huge. So far in this series, as a team, the Wolves are 35.5% from outside the arc. Dallas is 38%. That's not a massive difference. But, I mean, and actually Minnesota's made more threes. They've shot more threes in this series. The difference is the fourth quarters. These are close games. So it's not shocking to me that Minnesota has shot the ball better from 3 in this year. I shouldn't say better. That they've both taken and made more threes in this series than Dallas. It's not as simple as that. It's also, when it comes down to it at the end of the game, the quality of shots being generated. I gave the example on Monday's show, the postgame pod, of coming out of a timeout. The Wolves had a listless possession that ended in a contested 3-point attempt at the end of the shot clock. And coming out of a timeout, the execution just hasn't been there. Now, it's easier when you have Luka, but that's where superstars have to be superstars. Which, speaking on that end of the floor, an adjustment for the Wolves to make, or an adjustment that happened last game, Minnesota tried to, well, I should say it this way. Dallas did a really good job. They ran a lot of double drag screen actions in game 3. And what they were trying to do is Minnesota was trying to kind of manipulate it. They were trying to avoid Rudy being on an island. And they were trying to, like, they didn't want Ant to have to chase Kyrie on the floor. So they tried to hide him on Derek Jones Jr. to try and, save him a little bit, save his legs a bit. And they were still trying to avoid Conley being, dead center in a lot of these actions. So the thought process was like, hey, so what Dallas was trying to do is they were trying to manipulate it so that then Conley still ended up on Kyrie anyways. And the Wolves were accepting that, and occasionally ended up on Luka. The Wolves accepted that because in their mind it was better than Rudy ending up out there, or Karl-Anthony Towns ending up out there. And Luka was totally fine with that. Conley's a good defender, but he's also 36, 37, and he's undersized compared to Luka, who's a massive human. He's like 6'8", 6'9". And so Luka didn't have any problem getting a shot off against Mike Conley. He also drew a couple of shooting fouls against him. Conley fouled Kyrie a couple of times too. And Conley admitted after the game, he was committing a lot of shooting fouls in this game. That wasn't handled super well. And it's also a little unfair to expect Conley to defend in space against somebody like Luka. So Dallas is doing such a good job manipulating this, and there isn't an easy answer for Minnesota other than they've done a decent job of taking away rollers, at least in the latter part of game 3. Part of that was Lively being off the floor with the neck injury. But it was taking away that short roll action for Dallas a little bit. But then the problem would be they'd load up to try and help if they were going to trap or blitz, great. But otherwise try and help if Luka got his shoulders past Conley or whoever was guarding him. But then they weren't getting enough low man help. And there were a couple of possessions where Anthony Edwards fell asleep on it. He wasn't the only one, but I think it's a big spots because he was guarding Derrick Jones Jr. in the corner, or occasionally it was even Rudy. Rudy's typically has really good awareness, but they missed these low man assignments that allowed Dallas to eat at the rim once again. And that's consistently been an issue in this series. So this is, again, more of a credit to Dallas than anything else. And I've been very impressed with everything that Jason Kidd's done in this series. And certainly the Minnesota coaching staff has been underwhelming with their lack of adjustments. But Dallas was Minnesota actually ended up being a plus 10 points in the paint in this game. But that was just because that third quarter push. And a lot of what Dallas has been doing at the stat I cited earlier, tongue twister, was these, close, semi-close defended shots, or what was the term? Semi-contested shots. Dallas is making them. The process for Dallas is so good to get their best players the best shots. And Minnesota isn't getting those same shots for Ant, those same quality of looks. And a one-on-one mid-range jumper isn't the best shot you're going to get most of the time. But for Luka, that's not a terrible shot. And for Ant, it's better than a lot of the stuff that was happening process-wise for Minnesota. So defensively, I don't have a problem with the Wolves switching stuff, but that is only going to work when you've got Nickeil Alexander. I don't think it works with Conley. I don't think it works with Rudy as much on the perimeter. If you've got this long but smaller than their starting lineup out there with Alexander Walker and Ant in the backcourt, you've got Jaden McDaniels, you've got Kyle Anderson, and then Nas or Cat in the game, you can get away with switching a lot of that stuff. I actually thought Cat did an okay job on Luka when he got switched onto him a couple of times. I'm fine with that. I actually think sometimes, as long as you're ready to bring help, and even if it's not a full-on blitz on the perimeter, that might put you in a better spot. I know Stan Van Gundy would tell you to blitz every single time. And hey, this is game 4. The Wolves are fighting for their playoff lives. I think clearly there's already a break glass in case of emergency, or you would have thought that would have been in game 3. I talked about this with Jackson Gatlin on Locked On NBA on Monday. I did a segment with Jackson, and I likened Rudy being put back into the game. I talked about it just being a hubris to the Wolves coaching staff, and hey, this has worked all season. We're just going to keep doing it. Game 3 should have been the break glass in case of emergency game. And if that's bench Rudy down the stretch, if that's switch nothing and blitz everything, if it's whatever that is, it should have happened in game 3. Now, I know it was a close game. So were games 1 and games 2. This is just, again, stuff around the periphery could give the Wolves a 5-point lead going into the final minute instead of a 1-point lead. These are these possessions here and there that they need to, along the way, make these adjustments so that it isn't a close game. Because clearly right now in a close playoff game, Luka has the upper hand. And I would be really surprised. At some point, the Wolves have to win one of these close games. So to lose 3 of them consecutively to Luka and Kyrie and the Mavs is really tough because, again, the Wolves are a good team. And as I pointed out earlier, these have all been close games. It's the stuff in the margins that matters. And they've got to pick up a couple more. Remember, I said this to Jackson too, it's easy to forget, Luka traveled with a minute and a half left in this game. And then he threw the ball away the next possession. They've done an okay job at times on Luka. It's just he's such an incredible player, and Kyrie's such an incredible player. The Wolves aren't getting that from their incredible players. They're not getting that from their superstars. And that's the difference in this series. As much as we can, and I have blamed coaching, there's been some officiating, especially in game 3, that's been iffy. There's been some execution and process things. The way they've defended Luka hasn't always been great. But they're in all of these games. It's just this stuff on the periphery that is so disappointing because they're essentially 0 in all of it. Dallas is winning all this peripheral stuff, and it really adds up. I want to close by talking about Karl-Anthony Towns. I talked about his numbers a little bit ago, but I want to talk about a couple of other mentality type things and my take on him so far in this series, and that'll be how we round out the show here today. Okay. Karl-Anthony Towns, real quick, to this point in the series, Cat is averaging 15 points per game on 28% shooting from the field, 13% from outside the arc. He's gotten to the line, 15-ish times, 14 times. I think he's like 12 or 14 from the line. That's fine. It's 86%. Only 8 rebounds a game, 3 assists per game, and actually hasn't turned the ball over a lot. He's been a higher volume guy with the ball in his hands, a higher usage guy, but the process to get to his threes hasn't been great. I talked about how I think he's rushing things, and I know he's got a quick release. I know he doesn't always need to set his feet. For people that don't watch the Wolves regularly, they probably think it's a lot worse than it actually is. That's how Cat usually shoots threes. It's a quick trigger. And if anything like near the top of the circle, that's his bread and butter. It's cash every time when he's open there, except for this series, hasn't been every time. I'm actually pretty sure all 3 of his made threes in the series have been from that straight on angle. For me, it's more that he's getting those looks and then he's rushing these weird baseline floaters and stuff. He's not getting any, and I'm not Charles Barkley. I'm not saying get him a ton of post touches. Just get him in the, get your big butt down low and all that stuff that Shaq and Charles say. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying he should get a couple of post touches here and there because against Dallas, he should be able to have success there. And the Wolves have completely abandoned that. And they went to it a little bit against Denver. I think that would be one way to help get Cat back on track and then run a couple of plays to get him these looks. Just like early in the regular season when Cat was struggling, the Wolves offense was struggling, which it did for long stretches throughout the season. But to get Cat going, run the first or second play for Karl-Anthony Towns. Get him a bucket. Get him an open look from his favorite spot on the floor. Try and generate that look to get him rolling. And he already had a bit of a defeatist press conference after the game on Sunday after game 3 when he talked about, my first shot the other night went in and out and my first free throw this game went in and out. Fine. That's true. And he has had some bad luck with that stuff, but he's an incredible shooter. And I think he's been doing a little too much of the perimeter drives, off the dribble, off the catch, pump, fake, and drive. Like for him, that is a successful proposition. He's good at putting the ball on the floor and straight line drives to the rim. But right now, with the way Dallas is playing defense and loading up, it's not working as much. I think they've got to run some plays to get him open looks for 3 and get him a couple of post touches here and there. The other thing that I think has played into this, and this is not provable, but it makes sense to me, is he hasn't had a specific defensive assignment. And I talked about this on the show. Actually, maybe it was with Jackson on Monday's Locked On NBA. In round 1, Cat was so focused on guarding Kevin Durant that whatever he got offensively was going to be gravy. And, it was just kind of like, hey, whatever opportunities I get, I'm going to make the most of them. And he had like one bad game in there. But overall, in that first round series against Phoenix, the sweep, he had 19 points per game on 53% from 53% from the floor, 53% from 3, 89% at the free throw line, 9.5 rebounds per game. Really, really good. There was a little bit of foul trouble mixed in there. He only averaged 28 minutes per game, but he was guarding Kevin Durant. So that's to be expected, right? Really good first round series for Karl-Anthony Towns. Against Denver, he had a pretty specific defensive assignment in guarding Nikola Jokic for the majority of the series. Again, just 19 points a game, 9 rebounds a game, but the efficiency, 51% from the field, 39% from 3. 19 points, 9 boards, 3 assists. Turnovers were palatable. Stayed on the floor a little bit more in that series, 35 minutes per game. Different but specific defensive assignments. KD in round 1, Joker in round 2. This round, there's not a clear matchup for him on Dallas's team. I mean, they don't, especially with no Maxi Kleba in the rotation for Dallas. Like Daniel Gafford is not getting plays run for him. PJ Washington, was good the other night, but I don't think he'd made any threes in the first 2 games. He made a couple the other night in game 3. Had 16 and 8 in this game, but like it's not the same thing, right? I mean, 2 of the top 8 players in the NBA, the best player, and then wherever you want to put Kevin Durant right now. Towns was great. And the unfortunate thing is, unless the Wolves make this incredible historical comeback and win the series, what everyone nationally is going to remember is Cat's third round, conference final collapse. But the Wolves don't get to where they're at without Karl-Anthony Towns. And I know I've been called a Cat apologist on this, because of how I talk about Cat on this podcast, but he gets far too much flack. And he is a massive reason, as much as Anthony Edwards. And I mean that because of the value he provided defensively in the first 2 rounds. He is every bit as much the reason for the Timberwolves being in the conference finals as Anthony Edwards. He's just got to be a little smarter offensively, and the Wolves have to give him a defined role. If it's going back to blitzing all the time like they did 2 years ago when they lost to Memphis in the playoffs, that series, with Vando on the team and Pat Bev, fine. Just make a decision, give him a defined role. And while I praised Chris Finch and the coaching staff for switching up the defensive coverages in this series and showing Dallas some different looks and switching more often and doing some different stuff, that's great. But maybe it's just they're being too cute with it. Blitz everything. If PJ Washington's going to drop 30 on 6 made threes in game 4 for a sweep, fine. Just don't let Luka and Kyrie do what they've been doing to you. And that's where I'm at this point. And I think the ancillary benefit there is it helps your stars, Kat and Ant, know there's less thinking. This is our role every time down the floor. This is how we're going to defend. And now we can focus on offense. And yeah, it's going to take a little more out of you. There is no tomorrow if you lose this game. Game at a time. The most cliche thing ever, one game at a time. Because of that mentality, treat it like the Super Bowl. This is your Super Bowl. The next 4 games, if they're fortunate enough to get 4 games, are their Super Bowl. There is no more tomorrow. Blitz on everything, play all out. Hopefully you get enough offensively, and hopefully Jaden and Naz keep doing what they've been doing offensively, and you should win. All 3 of these games have been close. Do more work in the margins, knock down the open looks, generate a few more turnovers by doing this, get the ball out of Luka's and Kyrie's hands. Remember, game 3, 9 assists for those guys combined. They had 7 turnovers. Dallas had 4 more turnovers than Minnesota on the night. They will turn the ball over. They've turned it over more often than Minnesota in this series. They turned it over more often in the regular season. This is the last opportunity for Minnesota. They need to do all of the above. Blitz all the time. Give defined roles to Cat and Ant. Knock down those open shots. Keep doing what they're doing in a lot of other areas. Get to the line more often, I guess, would be huge. They were minus 14 in terms of attempts and makes in game 3. So I'd be surprised if they were swept. I'm actually a little surprised Dallas is favored by 2. I don't think it sounded like Ant hadn't let that reality set in yet, that they were on the brink of elimination. We'll see. We'll see what this team is made of, which, we have along the way quite a bit, but they need to come out and play the best game of the season. Anything can happen in a game 5 back at home if they win that one. And then if they can continue the backs against the wall thing and force a game 7 back in Minnesota, who knows? And I talked about this the other day. I know teams are 0-154, I think is the stat, when they are down 0-3 in a 7-game series in the NBA playoffs. But if there's a team that can flip a switch, it's Minnesota. They haven't lost 4 games in a row all season. It's only the second time they've lost 3 games in a row. Can they flip the switch like they did in game 6 of the second round series against Denver? Can they flip the switch like they did following game 82 into the regular season against Phoenix, or from the game 82 of the regular season to the first round series against Phoenix? Can that switch be flipped again, and can it stay on for 4 straight games? We'll see. We'll find out. We'll have the postcast following the game tonight. Following game 4, it's a 7:30 tip in Dallas. Postcast, live on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. That audio will be here. After the fact, I'll have a show Wednesday, the postgame pod, bright and early. And, win or lose, of course, daily, Monday through Friday. If the Wolves do win, 7:30 p.m. Central Target Center on Thursday for game 5. We'll, of course, talk all about that after the fact as well on Thursday, reacting to what happens in game 4. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere where we listen to podcasts. That includes YouTube. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. A reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7. Cover the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Remember, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and of course, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.